clean their floors, but now I'll clean this board with the truth.
Imagine being laughed at just because of your job, and then proving everyone wrong in a way nobody saw coming. That's exactly what happened when a teacher mocked the school janitor, challenging him with an impossible calculus problem. What followed left the entire classroom stunned. Stay tuned, because this story will make you rethink everything. And hey, if you love powerful true stories, don't forget to subscribe for more. The story begins in a quiet suburban high school, the kind where routines rarely change and everyone seems to know their place. Students rushed between classes, teachers lectured with the same monotone every day, and staff members blended into the background. Among them was Mr. Thomas, the janitor, a man in his late 40s with kind eyes, worn hands, and a smile that never seemed to fade. For most students, he was invisible. He mopped the floors, changed light bulbs, and carried heavy boxes without complaint. Some kids greeted him politely, but many barely noticed him. In their eyes, he was just the janitor. But what no one knew was that Mr. Thomas carried a past that few could imagine. Every morning, before the first bell rang, he quietly sat in the staff lounge with a notebook filled not with cleaning schedules, but with numbers, formulas, and scribbles that looked more like a mathematician's diary than a janitor's notes. He had once dreamed of teaching, of standing in front of a blackboard explaining equations. Life, however, had taken a different turn, and responsibility forced him into work that paid the bills, not the soul. Still, he loved learning. Mathematics wasn't just numbers for him. It was a language, a way of thinking, a quiet companion. During long, lonely nights, he never flaunted his knowledge. He kept it private, almost sacred. That's why what happened one ordinary afternoon shocked everyone. A group of students were struggling through an advanced calculus problem. Their teacher, known for his sharp tongue and sarcasm, spotted Mr. Thomas in the hallway. With a smirk, he invited him in, not out of respect, but to make a point. A point. That was supposed to be humiliating, but instead, it would change everything. The advanced calculus class was tense. Students scribbled furiously, trying to make sense of the problem written on the board. A complex integral that even the top performers in the room struggled with. The teacher, Mr. Reynolds, leaned back against his desk, arms folded, enjoying the struggle. He wasn't the kind of teacher who offered gentle guidance. He preferred to remind students how difficult math could be, and how much smarter he was than them. That's when the door creaked open. Mr. Thomas, pushing his cart of supplies, entered to empty the trash cans. His quiet presence usually went unnoticed, but not this time. Mr. Reynolds' eyes lit up with an idea, and his lips curled into a smirk. "Well, well," he said loudly, drawing the students' attention. "Maybe our janitor here can solve this problem for us. What do you think, class?" Laughter rippled through the room. Some students chuckled nervously, others outright burst into giggles. A few whispered things like, "No way he even knows what that is," or "This will be hilarious." Mr. Thomas froze for a moment, his hands tightening on the mop handle. He wasn't offended by hard work, but the tone in the teacher's voice, the mockery, the assumption that his job meant he was incapable, cut deeper than most insults. Still, he remained calm. He looked at the board, then back at the teacher. "Do you really want me to try?" he asked softly. Mr. Reynolds waved dismissively. "Oh, come on, it's just a bit of fun. Let's see what you've got. Prove us wrong, if you can." The class leaned forward, some expecting a clumsy attempt, others waiting for the awkward silence that would follow. Phones discreetly came out, ready to capture the embarrassing moment. Mr. Thomas slowly walked toward the chalkboard. Every step echoed in the quiet room. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the laughter around him. He picked up a piece of chalk, studied the problem for a brief moment, and then started writing. The room fell silent. The first line he wrote wasn't random, it was precise, logical, and shockingly correct. Students exchanged wide-eyed glances. Mr. Reynolds's smirk began to fade. Something extraordinary was unfolding, and no one was ready for what came next. The chalk squeaked softly as Mr. Thomas moved across the board with steady confidence. At first, a few students snickered, waiting for him to stumble. But the longer he wrote, the quieter the room grew. Each symbol he placed matched perfectly with the textbook methods, except he seemed to do it faster, cleaner, almost effortlessly. "Wait, that's actually right," one student whispered under their breath. A ripple of surprise passed through the class. Phones that were once held up to mock now captured in awe. Some leaned forward in disbelief, others exchanged nervous laughter, not knowing whether to cheer or stay silent. Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. But even he couldn't ignore the precision. Mr. Thomas wasn't guessing, he was teaching with every stroke. Then came the first twist. Instead of stopping after a single step, he explained as he went along. "If you look closely, this integral isn't as complicated as it seems, it just requires the right substitution." Gasps filled the room. He wasn't only solving it, he was breaking it down like a true teacher. Students scribbled notes, desperate to keep up. Another beat. A student in the front row, one of the top performers, raised his hand timidly. "Sir, can you explain that substitution again?" "Sir." The word hung heavy in the air. For the first time, a student had addressed him not as janitor, but with respect. Mr. Thomas smiled kindly and re-explained the step, his tone patient, his presence commanding. The tension shifted. What started as a joke was turning into an impromptu masterclass. Meanwhile, Mr. Reynolds's face reddened. His authority was slipping. This wasn't supposed to happen. The man he tried to humiliate was stealing the room with nothing but knowledge, and then came the third twist. Mr. Thomas didn't just finish the problem, he solved it in a way that was more elegant than the solution in the teacher's manual. When he placed the final answer on the board, the room erupted in shocked silence, followed by an audible gasp. Every eye turned to the teacher. Would he admit it? Would he acknowledge? What just happened? The tension had reached its peak, but the story wasn't done yet. Something even bigger was about to unfold. The final number hung on the chalkboard like a crown jewel. Mr. Thomas stepped back, wiping the chalk dust from his hands. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence was so thick you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then, applause. It started with a few hesitant claps from the back, then spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire class was cheering. Students who had been ready to laugh now looked at him with admiration, as if they were seeing him for the first time. But not everyone was celebrating. Mr. Reynolds slammed his palm on the desk. "Enough!" he barked, his voice sharp. The cheering died instantly. His face was red, not from pride, but from humiliation. He forced a tight smile. "Well, that was, interesting. But let's not get carried away. Anyone can memorize a trick or two. It doesn't mean you understand calculus." The students glanced at each other, unsure. The energy shifted again. The man who had just stunned them was being dismissed, as if his brilliance was a fluke. Mr. Thomas, however, didn't flinch. He calmly set the chalk down and turned toward the teacher. His voice was steady but firm. "If you'd like, I can. Solve another. Or perhaps you'd prefer to challenge me with a problem of your own choosing?" The room collectively inhaled. The janitor had just thrown down a challenge, directly at the teacher who tried to mock him. Eyes darted between the two men. A battle was brewing, one that could either crush Mr. Thomas under the weight of authority or expose a truth no one was ready for. Mr. Reynolds narrowed his eyes, gripping the edge of his desk. The pride of a teacher versus the hidden genius of a janitor. Only one could walk away respected. The next words out of Mr. Reynolds's mouth would determine everything, and what he said changed the fate of the entire school. The tension in the classroom was electric. Every student leaned forward, waiting. Mr. Reynolds's pride was on the line, and Mr. Thomas, calm, steady, almost serene, stood ready. "Fine," Mr. Reynolds said through clenched teeth. He snatched a piece of chalk and scrawled a new problem on the board. This one was far harder than the first, an advanced multivariable calculus problem that most graduate students would struggle with. He stepped aside with a smug grin. "Let's see how far you get with this." A nervous murmur spread through the class. Some students whispered, "That's impossible," while others shook their heads, worried the janitor had gone too far. But Mr. Thomas simply smiled. He picked up the chalk again, studied the equation for a brief moment, and began. This time he didn't just write, he spoke. "Mathematics," he began, "is not about showing off. It's about understanding the patterns of the universe. When you respect it, it respects you back." He explained each step with such clarity that students who had struggled for months suddenly understood concepts that had once felt impossible. Complex substitutions became simple, intimidating integrals, unraveled like threads in a fabric. His voice was calm, his movements precise. The classroom transformed into something magical. Phones were lowered, not to record, but because students were genuinely learning. A janitor was giving them the math lesson they had always wished for. Beat 1. A student whispered, "This makes more sense than anything Reynolds has ever taught." Others nodded, their eyes shining with realization. Beat 2. Mr. Reynolds began pacing, his confidence cracking. Each correct line on the board was another blow to his authority. Beat 3. As the solution neared its end, Mr. Thomas paused. The room held its breath. Then, with one final elegant stroke, he completed the problem flawlessly. The class erupted, not with laughter this time, but with thunderous applause. Students stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouting, "Genius!" and "Unbelievable." For the first time, Mr. Reynolds had no words. His face was pale, his ego shattered. He had tried to humiliate a man because of his job title, and instead, he had exposed his own arrogance. Then came the most powerful moment of all. Mr. Thomas put the chalk down gently and turned to the students. "Remember this," he said, softly. "Never judge someone's mind by their uniform. Respect is earned not by titles, but by actions." The room fell silent again, but this time out of reverence. Every student knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be retold for years. By the next day, the story had spread across the school. Teachers, staff, and students alike spoke of the janitor who had outshined the math. Teacher in his own class, whispers turned to respect, respect turned to admiration. Students began greeting him not just as a janitor, but as Mr. Thomas, the man who had humbled a teacher with nothing but brilliance. And Mr. Reynolds? His pride never fully recovered. Though he continued teaching, he never again tried to belittle Mr. Thomas or anyone else because the memory of that day lingered like a scar. The janitor had not only solved an equation, he had solved something much bigger. He had shattered prejudice and proven that true intelligence knows no job title, no boundaries, no limits. Long after the chalk dust had settled, the story of Mr. Thomas continued to echo through the halls of that high school. Students who once walked past him without a second glance now stopped to greet him, sometimes even asking for help with homework. The man who had once been invisible was now a symbol of quiet greatness, a reminder that true worth isn't measured by what you wear or what job you hold, but by the knowledge and integrity you carry. The most remarkable change, however, wasn't just in how students saw him, it was in how they saw themselves. Suddenly, the so-called average kids felt inspired. If a janitor could stand in front of a board and solve what their teacher couldn't, maybe they too could rise above the limits others placed on them. The classroom walls that once felt suffocating now felt like a challenge waiting to be broken. The lesson was clear: never underestimate someone based on appearances. Respect should not be reserved only for those with titles or authority. Every person has a story, a hidden strength, a brilliance that may not always be visible. When you mock someone, you're not exposing their weakness. You're often exposing your own ignorance. And for Mr. Thomas, that day wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about embarrassing a teacher. It was about teaching something far greater than calculus. He reminded an entire generation that humility and respect open doors. Arrogance never can. Now pause for a moment and think about it. How many people do we overlook every single day? How many Mr. Thomases are out there carrying quiet genius while the world fails to notice? Maybe the security guard, the driver, the shopkeeper, any one of them could hold a wisdom or skill that could change how we see the world. So here's the takeaway. Never judge. Always respect. And keep your mind open, because greatness can come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the hidden strength inside every person, then don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful, true stories that inspire and challenge the way we think. And most importantly, next time you see someone who usually goes unnoticed, remember Mr. Thomas. Offer respect, because you never know what brilliance lies behind a humble smile.